Yay! Another edition of True Crime Thursday. What is happening, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ayman and I do all the hardcore, dirty investigating into these heinous crimes, so you don't have to worry your little head about it. You can just watch me and enjoy all of it without the added trauma. You're welcome. Now, I, for one, love the femme fatale trope. Fuck being a damsel in distress. You want to be that dangerous bombshell. Now, I'm not saying go out there and murder someone like Ruth Ellis did in today's case. I'm just saying have a backbone. Today's video is episode 10 of True Crime Thursday, so congrats to us for 10 episodes. Slow clap for me there. This is the blonde bombshell with a gun, the Ruth Ellis case. Now, before we get into it, I just wanted to give a shout out to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, you guys have heard me talk about Skillshare before. I've been using this online learning community for a few months now, and I've learned so much. There's classes for creative writing, animation, music production. I could go on. There's no ads or any of that bullshit. It's all premium learning, and it's less than $10 monthly with an annual subscription, which is a steal. As a creative that sometimes doesn't really know how to channel her energy, I watched Andy J. Pizza's class called Find Your Style, 5 exercises to unlock your creative ideas, and he kind of guides you with finding your own style within whatever medium you're into. Now, newsflash, you can't just sit at your desk waiting for your style to find you. You need to work at it and unpack your own artistic identity to see what your brand and your art really is and what it's about. Give it a go. Let me know what you think. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity as well. Link in the bio. But either way, you guys, let's get straight into today's episode, The Victim. Now, this case is super well known, and for some reason I knew nothing about it. I listened to a podcast on it a few nights ago, and I don't think it's fair to just focus on the victim's life in this regard. It's only fair we go into the assailant's life as well. The victim in question was David Blakely. Born on the 17th of June 1929 in Sheffield, David went to a public school called Shrewsbury, but based off his grades, it was clear to see school was not his forte. His parents divorced while he was growing up, and that, mixed with a bunch of other factors, left David quite directionless. He jumped from career to career. I'm talking hotel management, being in the national service, and then finally being a race car driver. But David wasn't exactly hard for cash. After his parents got divorced when he was younger, his mum married a rich-ass man with a huge estate, so before he was even a teenager, he became filthy rich. David met Ruth Ellis in 1953 while she was working as the manager of the Little Club. On to, of course, Ruth Ellis. Now, Ruth Ellis, on the other hand, was born in Wales in October of 1926 and was the second youngest out of 6 children in a lower class family. Her musician of a dad would abuse his children constantly as well. She left school around the age of 14 to become a waitress, but by the time she was 17, she had become pregnant by her first husband, Claire, and gave birth to a boy named Andy. Now, her husband very quickly moved back to Canada, and that was just kind of over and done with. In November of 1950, Ruth married divorced dentist George Ellis, who happened to be a raging, violent alcoholic. He very quickly found out she was having an affair, which made their relationship very on and off, obviously. Now, she gave birth to Georgina a year later, but George refused to acknowledge paternity and got divorced quickly after that. Now, at this point, publicly, she told people she worked as a hostess, but she would routinely model nude or engage in sex work in order to pay her rent and feed her children, who she later sent off to live with her mum anyway. In 1953, she was made manager of the Little Club, and that's, as I said, where Ruth and David's relationship began. And within 2 weeks of seeing and sleeping with each other, David had moved into her apartment despite him being engaged to someone else at the time. Now, at first, the relationship really wasn't meant to be serious. It was just kind of meant to be friends with benefits, and because of the fact they were from different class backgrounds, their relationship was kind of doomed from the beginning. They dated for 2 years, they lived together, but never once did he bring Ruth back to meet his family. But Ruth wasn't an idiot. She loved him, but she also knew she most likely wouldn't marry him, so she kept her options open as well. She became involved with 32-year-old Desmond Cusson during her relationship with David, and both men knew about it. On to the case. On the 10th of April 1955, David left their flat at around 10 a.m. and told Ruth he'd be back later that night to take her on a date. By 9:30 that night, he still hadn't come home, so she called the friends David said he'd be with, who told her David wasn't with them, which was also a complete lie since Ruth went there herself and saw his car parked outside their house. So she rang the doorbell again and again, and they refused to answer. Obviously pissed at this point, Ruth decided to bash in 3 of David's car windows and then left. Naturally, David didn't come home that night, and Ruth spent the whole next day just waiting for him to call. So by that point, Ruth had had enough. She grabbed her gun, left the house in search of David with the sole intent to find him and kill him. Now, Ruth went around in a taxi and eventually found his car parked outside the Magdala pub, and as David and his friend Clive left the establishment, Ruth opened fire. When her second bullet hit him, she went to his body, stood over it, and shot him 3 more times for good measure. Ruth then told Clive to call the police, and she didn't even try and run, she didn't even try and deny it that it was her when EMTs rushed David to the hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. When backup officers came, she just followed one into the car and went straight to the station. Onto the investigation. The officers that initially interrogated Ruth thought it was a clear-cut case and that they'd figured her out to a T. They themselves reduced her to nothing but a jealous femme fatale. When asked about the murder, the only thing she said was, "I'm guilty," and that when pulling the trigger, of course she intended to kill him. She told the officers nothing other than the fact that she was guilty. She kept saying it again and again. The autopsy results showed that Ellis had been shot 4 times, despite the officer at the scene claiming he had 6 shots. When asked where she got the gun, she claimed a customer at her bar had given it to her 3 years prior and that she had never shot one before. But the gun was too well oiled and maintained for her to have never used it in 3 years. When talking to her other boyfriend, Desmond, he also corroborated her story of how she had got the gun. And they also explained away the well-maintained weapon with the fact that Ruth lived in a shady area and had a lot of male guests over, so she needed the gun for protection. But that was that. She was formally charged with his murder and sentenced to death, and no other investigation into their relationship was done. Ruth was then moved to an incarceration facility, and when her body was examined by medical staff, they found it completely covered in bruises. Ruth claimed David had been abusing her, once hitting her so hard on the head that she'd lost hearing in her left ear. Now, while in jail, she stayed quiet for the longest time, saying she didn't want to tell the police everything because it would involve mentioning who else was involved in the murder. Now, her solicitor, John Bigford, tried to get her conviction lowered to manslaughter, but Ruth had no interest in helping her own case. She didn't even care that she'd be abandoning her kids, she just said someone else would have to take care of them. Now, John had tried to do some good work on her behalf by questioning Desmond. He found out that Desmond was the one that gave her the gun after speaking to him, and he would also take her to target practice. He even admitted to driving Ruth to the pub that night, but when John told Ruth everything he'd found out and that they could get Desmond indicted for being an accessory to murder, she wasn't having it. She didn't want him involved at all and didn't think he needed to die for something she did. But as the wait dragged on, Ruth opened up more to John, saying David had been physically abusing her from the moment they started dating. She claimed on 2 occasions he had almost killed her by strangulation, and 2 weeks before the murder, David had punched her so hard in the stomach she had miscarried their child. So there was a lot more motive there other than Ruth just being a single jealous mother who wanted to off David because she couldn't fully have him. The aftermath. And it was only the day before Ruth was set to be executed that she came clean about Desmond's involvement. She told her new solicitor that when David never showed up on that first day to pick her up, she had spent the weekend drinking with Desmond and that he later drove her to the pub. But that confession didn't really matter, it didn't change anything. If anything, it just solidified the judge's decision since it showed the murder had been premeditated. On the 13th of July 1955, Ruth was hanged and buried in an unmarked grave inside Holloway Prison. By the 70s, her remains had been exhumed for reburial, and her son Andy found it and destroyed her headstone before committing suicide himself. So she left a good and bad impact on a lot of people in her life. And that is the case, you guys. Hi, Nin. She's like down here under the laptop being like, what's happening? Look, tail right there, you saw it. Boop. I thought Ruth Ellis was a very interesting case only because I understand, because she was very, very adamant on the fact that it was an eye for an eye and a living person for a living person. So it was only fair that she died because she killed David, 1 for 1, right? But I feel like there was so much more involved, like the battery, the domestic abuse, the fact that David probably knowingly, obviously knowing that she had become pregnant, killed that child because he knew that he couldn't marry her, and having a child out of wedlock with a prostitute was not going to look good on him. And the fact that Desmond, I don't know what happened the night that Desmond drove her to the pub when she killed him. Maybe he egged her on. Maybe he was more than just an accessory to the murder. Maybe he was a proper accomplice. I have no idea. Do I think she should have been hanged for it? No, I don't. I mean, jail, sure, but I don't think she deserved to die for what she did. Let me know what you guys thought of the case. I'm sure most of you know it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. As always, I will catch you next week for episode 11. Thank you so much for watching all 10 episodes. If you have, I really appreciate it and it means a lot to me, and I love you guys. Bye.